as a Cyclemania group all together. So whoever has done a bike challenge or participated in Cyclemania events before, then you are invited to join the Cyclemania group, and we can see how our group compares to others throughout the nation and throughout the world. And then we also created 3 other groups that we're helping to administer: a telecommuters on bikes group, an open streets bicyclist group, and then also an e-bike group for people who are riding electric bikes. So we just started the outreach for this. We're actually going to be pushing it more tomorrow and the next couple of days. If you want to take a look at those, the preliminary information is on our Traffic Solutions website. You go to trafficsolutions.org, there's a link on the homepage, or trafficsolutions.org/cycleseptember. And all the gathering and photo sharing and storytelling is done online, and the riding is done individually and with people in your household. So that's a little bit how it's going to go. Thanks, Heather.
Well, thank you, Lori. And it's just FYI, earlier I tried it out, and you can just Google Cycling September Santa Barbara and Love to Ride, and you'll find what Lori was talking about as well, if that went a little fast for you. So check that out to help build our community as best we can right now. And thank you all for arriving today. Just a reminder, throw yourselves on mute if you haven't, but I think we're pretty good right now. And if you want to ask questions throughout the talk, you can type them in, and I have a lovely assistant here, Jesse, who's wearing his Drossman Aylward shirt, who will let me know if they're timely questions that pertain to a certain slide. Feel free to type them in, but for the most part, probably a little better if we just did most of the Q&A at the end. Okay, and so before I fully dive in, one thing I really just want to talk about for a moment is, I don't know about all of you, but I find it really challenging to switch between what's going on in the news and our world, and then be like, oh, look, this is fun. Riding your bike is fun. I went somewhere really fun. And so I just want to take a real quick moment to acknowledge what's happening, you know, the challenges in the world right now, but especially just the last day or two, where yet another Black man was killed by the police, and protesters were shot and killed in Kenosha, Washington, and acknowledge that we keep trying to do the best we can locally. And so that's why I'm proud to be part of organizations like SB Bike and SAGE. And for example, SB Bike really goes out its way and helps our communities in need, gets into schools and helps the kids and provides so many opportunities. SB Bike has bilingual staff most of the time, you know, really trying to be as involved with all members of our community as possible. And so I just want to open that door, that if you feel like either SB Bike or SAGE can be doing something more or better to envelope our entire community in Santa Barbara County, please reach out to them, or please feel free to reach out to me, and I'll share your communications as we all keep doing the best that we can to make the world a little bit of a better place. And I'll also be putting that in context with the places that I've traveled a little bit. You know, in Santa Barbara, we're on historic Chumash land. And when you travel to New Zealand, you're on land that was first, you know, utilized and lived on, and food was grown by the Maori people. And when you go to Australia, the first peoples of that land were the Aboriginal people on the land. And every country has dealt with their history in a different way, and some better than others. But I will try and tie those pieces in a little bit. And a quick shout out to, we have guests from Australia today, so cool. Thanks for coming all the way across that really big pond to hang out with us. All right, so I'm going to try and switch over to slides and show you some really cool pictures, and hopefully tell the occasional funny story, if I can do that in this weird vacuum without a direct audience to interact with. Okay, so yeah, as I mentioned earlier, I spent about 3 months in New Zealand. It was my second trip to New Zealand. The first time about 2 years ago, I went for 3 weeks and said that was not nearly enough and I'm coming back. And so this time I went for 3 months and then hopped over to Australia for about a month after that. On a lot of these trips, I tend to travel alone. But I was fortunate this last trip to New Zealand, the first couple weeks I spent with friends. And so there'll actually be 1 or 2 pictures taken of me, which is unusual. Usually it's just pictures of scenery because I'm traveling alone, including this shot by my friend Esther Hornier that I was able to travel with her and Scott for a little bit of time in New Zealand. Hold on, trying to get my slide to advance for some reason. It's not, there we go. Okay, so every great international trip starts with flying with your bike, and it's always fun. You show up in an airport and you're like, I have to build my bike now. And so far that's gone pretty well for me, fortunately. And this trip started with an especially big bang. The night before my international, something like 15-hour flight to New Zealand, I got suddenly violently ill and spent the entire night vomiting, like bad, really bad. And all I could think is, I'm supposed to get on an international flight tomorrow. How, this is not doable. What's going to happen? How can I do this? Next morning came, I ate like 1 piece of toast and kept it in me and said, all right, we're going to the airport, and made it to New Zealand, where the lovely lady at the info desk was like, sure, build up your bike in the airport, and here's the best way to get to the bike path and everything. So it was a rough start, but a classic, incredibly warm Kiwi welcome. A little map. So there's 2 different colors going on here. On this trip, I flew into Wellington right here, which is the southern tip of the North Island of New Zealand. And from there, I immediately took a ferry over to Blenheim and Nelson and across here, because I knew I wanted to do what's called the top of the South right here. And the best way to get to the top of the South was actually to fly into the North Island and take the, I think it was around a 4-hour ferry ride over. So the red line, with the exception of the ferry, is what I did by bicycle. And the blue line is where my boyfriend Jesse came for 3 weeks with a car. And so I cheated a little and was in a car for the 3 weeks of the blue line, to see some other parts of the island as well. And so took the ferry over, met up with Scott and Esther, who are pictured here, and we did what's called the Queen Charlotte track. And one of the reasons that I went in mid-November this year is some of the famous, what are historically walking tracks in New Zealand, are open to bikes until December 1, and then they close for the busy season. So we wanted to get there prior to December 1 to ride a few of these famous tracks before they closed to bikes because of the busyness. And so we did this beautiful ride along the top of the South, starting on the Queen Charlotte track, where you just along the water line constantly, the views forever. New Zealand is all about the birds when it comes to wildlife. One of the best things about New Zealand is there's nothing there that can kill you in terms of animals. They have no snakes, and they have no bear, they have no mountain lions, but they do have some sometimes annoying birds, but they have great bird life. And so just a quick introduction to them. At the top, let's see, the top left is neat. This is a takahe. They actually thought the takahe was extinct for a while, and then they found some of them and were able to grow them and nurture them and release them into the wild again. So they've been reintroducing the takahe. Then heading next to the takahe, here is a little bird called the weka. I'll tell you more about the weka in a moment. It's a special bird. And top right is a mussel with its bisel threads still intact, which I just thought was really cool looking. And then bottom left, we have paradise ducks, which pair for life, and you always see them in these pairs, and so it's just pretty neat to see them. Then we have this awkward looking thing called a pukeko. The pukeko is also known as Australasia swamp hen, which is also a fun name, but not quite as much fun as saying pukeko. They also have carnivorous snails in New Zealand, which is really cool. And this was a shell I found of the snail was no longer in there, but the remaining shell of a carnivorous snail. And of course, the Oreo cows. I love the Oreo cows. I don't think they're really called that. I just call them the Oreo cows. Sorry, my computer's being really slow on changing the image. Trying to... All right, getting at the change, hopefully to show you the Heafy track here in a second. Try and get it to behave. There we go. Now, hopefully I didn't go past it. All right, so this is a shot. You can see my bike here in the background, my tent, as I rode with Scott Nestor along the famous Heafy track on the northwest sort of corner of the South Island of New Zealand. My tent is the #1 top piece of every bike trip. I can't camp anywhere without someone asking about the tent. It's ultralight single wall Cuban fiber. The bottom and the sides you see there are just mesh. It's very light, which is why I carry it. That said, after 2 years, it's not holding up much more, and I'm going to switch probably to a more traditional tent for future trips, both because they're freestanding and cost. But this tent worked great for New Zealand, other than when it was raining sideways for 3 days in a row, which actually happened numerous times this trip. Just turning off my video, trying to get these slides to carry us all forward, so to speak. Okay. It'll probably go when it's ready here in a second. The Heafy track, though, is a beautiful, really rideable, but definitely you want a mountain bike kind of trail. But it's also one of what they call the great walks in New Zealand. They have a lot of really famous great walks where you can stay in huts, or you can camp. So after you finish the Heafy track, you head down the west coast of the South Island into a great little old sort of fishing, farming, hippie town called Karamea. And they really embrace color and flair and style of New Zealand. And so this was one rainbow house that I saw on my trip that I just really enjoyed. The visuals of that. I also saw a lot of beehives, especially on the North Island, that were painted like rainbows. And it just adds that little pop of pleasure into your day. So continuing down the west coast, I ended up in the town of, see if I can get this right, Waimangaroa. And I had been there before on my last trip and met this wonderful woman, Bev, who ran a little coffee cart. It's really just a tiny village. And when I was there 2 years ago, it was rainy weather. It happens a lot in New Zealand, the rain thing. And she had offered to drive me down the coast to the location I was trying to get to. And I just met her, and you just get embraced with so much kindness in these small New Zealand towns. And so I came back to Waimangaroa and I said, Bev, do you remember me? I was here 2 years ago. We talked, you offered me this ride. They have this beautiful artwork. So these wooden sculptures you see are by Woody, who lives there. And I got to meet Woody, and he took me on a tour. And a lot of the imagery in his sculptures are the native, representing native Maori gods and goddesses and stories of the founding of the lands and the mountains in New Zealand. And while I was at this coffee cart talking to Woody and Bev, they're like, hey, the circus is in town tonight, and there's free camping, and it's $10. And I was like, yes. So I spent the afternoon just going up a local climb and looking at some historical mining stuff until it was time for the circus in this tiny village. I was especially willing to go because the circus in New Zealand isn't like the circus here in the US. It's not animals, it's like human performers and live music and things like that. There was a local gentleman playing his guitar and doing folk songs pictured in the center. They had all kinds of fire throwers and dancers throughout the evening. Honestly, there were more performers than there were people in the village or at the circus event. But for $10, I got to meet people, spend the evening juggling, hanging out, watching performances, and camp for free. So it was a win-win all around. And so it's those kind of like surprise moments that I love about cycle touring. I don't plan these things out in advance. I don't sit down and say, I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to spend this many days at this location and then move on. I really just go where the bicycle and the weather take me. And when people tell me about something cool, then I have the freedom to just stop and spend the night and go to the circus. After Waimangaroa, there's not photoed, but is 3 days of solid rain and a broken crank. Not broken because of this photo, but I was leaving the northern part of the island and pedaling down the west coast, and my crank came off my bike. I'm like 2 weeks into a 4-month plus trip. I'm like, great, I managed to get it back on, tighten it, it would come loose, I'd bang it on, tighten it. Finally got it, so it was sort of sticking. Got down to the bigger town of Westport, where I knew there would be a bike shop where I could get things looked at and work done. And it poured and poured and poured for 3 days straight. Sort of common November weather, sunny, beautiful days followed by rain. November's early season in New Zealand. But again, I wanted to get on some of those tracks that close on December 1. So that's why I went. Plus, there's no crowds, and it's really wonderful to get there before the tourist influx and the crowds. And every town in New Zealand has somewhere to camp. Either these larger holiday parks or smaller motor camps, or even smaller, I'm blanking on the name of them, the domain, like the town square, basically, where there's a meeting building that becomes like a little campground, and they cost anywhere from $5 to $20 NZD, which is basically free to $20 US. And they all have kitchens and usually some pots and pans and things, as well as showers. Like, it's really what we would call glamping in the US, but for less money than you would pay for camping in the US. So that's one of the nice things about being a cycle tourist in New Zealand. And so I was going to get my bike fixed in Westport and found out it was a public holiday on Monday. The bike shop might not be open. You never know when the public holidays are going to be because they're different by different regions. But then some nice man also camped there, started asking me about my bike, and he's like, oh, I've got tools and I'm good at working on bikes. Do you want me to take a look at that? And so this stranger spent an hour pulling apart my cranks and cleaning and lubing and tightening and showing me ways I could get it to sort of keep going for a while without coming loose again. And again, it's those moments that are what I really remember forever, even more than, you know, the beautiful scenery. So New Zealand is great for those kind of moments of human connection and kindness. So then the rain sort of let up, but not much, as you can maybe tell from these photos. And I left Westport and wanted to hike to a hut. So New Zealand has backcountry huts all throughout, and you can buy either individual passes or a season pass. And they range anywhere from $5 a night to a lot more, depending on the kind of facility that it is. And so I wanted to go up to this Buckland Peak hut and get out, because I knew more rain was coming, but I also didn't want to sit around any more days in Westport. And so I went to the trailhead, and I carry a backpack with me because I like to be able to switch between riding the bike and doing hikes, and even several like backpacking trips. And so that means I need to leave my bicycle at the trailhead. In New Zealand, especially the South Island, is a pretty safe place, and I only carry a really lightweight cable lock. So you still want to be careful if you're leaving it for days. And so I do things like hike off into the bush and sort of hide my bike behind trees. And this particular parking lot didn't have a great way to get very far from the parking lot, so I used all the brush and things that you see here to cover my bike to make it less noticeable from the parking lot if someone were to come along while I was backpacking. And then I started the long walk up to Buckland Peak, which was right where that arrow is pointing on your slide. Yeah, it was a bit of a thick day out. And I hiked these road walks through farmlands for quite a while. And then when I started to try and find my way up the side of the mountain, it was already raining on me and I couldn't find the trail, and I went the wrong way for half an hour before realizing it was the wrong way, and went back and still couldn't find the trail. And at that point, I'm like, it's not safe for me to head up in the mountain. There's zero visibility and it's not a clear trail. So I had to come back down to my bike that same day and then start heading further down the coast by bicycle to get to the next camping area to spend the night. And so I was headed for this place called Charleston, where I saw on my map there was a motor camp, a campground. And these campgrounds often not only can you tent camp or RV camp, but they also have bunk beds and small housing kind of units or cabins. And so I got to Charleston Motor Camp, and in my head I was like, Heather, just camp, because I hate spending money because I don't have a job. And so I wanted to, I usually tent camp as much as possible because it's the cheapest option. But I get to Buckland Camp, and sorry, we're playing with technical things here as I'm trying to speak at the same time. And I decided to spring $30, which is like 23 US, for this room completely to myself. I pull up and the woman's like, first I just want to know the cost because I really didn't want to spend a lot of money. She's like, well, if you'll take an unfinished room since you've got your sleeping bag, it's $30. I'm like, yes, please. And within half an hour of being in my room, the scene on the right is what let loose outside, and it just was torrential rain and sideways rain. And you may recall that image of my tent where it doesn't come all the way down to the ground, it's only mesh on the bottom. It's not great with sideways rain for days on end. So I was so grateful to be in this bunk room at this motor camp for the night. And just, it was boom, lightning and thunder outside, shaking the place, and it was quite a storm. So I was fortunate to have a roof over my head. From there, I continued down the west coast, which is always beautiful, and yeah, just kept going down the coast until I wanted to head inland a little bit. Sorry, still just playing with some technical things. My computer is old and tired. All right, so I headed inland, and they're not afraid to build trails in New Zealand, anywhere and everywhere, and we'll see a few shots that look like that. This particular area apparently gets pretty wet consistently, so they're like, we'll build a boardwalk. You can ride or hike on that. And so I took this route up into the mountains, sort of a back way to the town called Reefton, to one of the huts that I wanted to stay at the night. So this particular hut was a little different. I had to reserve it in advance, but it was only $15. It was massive, and I show up and I had the place to myself. So at this point we are round about here. I'm hoping you can see my cursor when I do that. That second red line in, and so that's where we are in the South Island of New Zealand at this time. And so this is the inside of one of those huts. Some of them sleep 4 people, some of them sleep 40 people. And you just sleep next to your new best friend that you met that day, whoever comes in and gets the spot on the bed next to you, and you all just line up in your brightly colored sleeping bags. And you always want to bring earplugs for hut sleeping. But again, being November and before the busy season, no people. I had this hut completely to myself. I see a question there about a guidebook or blog for New Zealand. I did not. I really just research and ask questions as I go. The friends that I was with on the first leg in that photograph, they have gone to New Zealand for 4 years in a row now and bikepack and hike and do all kinds of things. So they know a lot at this point, and you meet locals, and just looking at the doc maps, Department of Conservation maps, and yeah, I really just sort of make it up as I go, and see where I end up. Yeah. This gets back to that idea of they just will make a trail anywhere in New Zealand. They're like, oh, we need to get through this mountain and over that bridge. Well, we'll just blow a hole in the mountain and then build a swinging bridge across the river, and the trail will keep going. And it works. Yeah, so they take their trail building very seriously there. These swinging bridges are really a theme in New Zealand. Some of them are very long and very bouncy on your bicycle. So I followed this trail out of the town of Reefton, which, by the way, I give Reefton 5 stars. If you're using this to sort of plan your own trip to New Zealand, Reefton's a lovely little town with everything the hungry cycle tourist could want. High quality food, which in my opinion is tough to come by in New Zealand. A motor camp right in town for inexpensive camping, access to trails. I definitely recommend Reefton as a place to go in New Zealand. And so I headed up this trail. I was going to something called Kirwan's Hut. So the trail was a little rough and I had to sort of shove and push and carry my bike sometimes to get up there. But it wasn't too bad in the scheme of things because I'm not afraid of a little hike a bike. So I get up to Kirwan's Hut and it's just gorgeous. It's just one of those, it's newly built, as you can see. Some of the huts are a little old and dingy and smoky, and I'd rather just stay in my tent if it's good weather. But this was just lovely. And once again, no one was there. I had it completely to myself. This is the view from inside the hut, not so bad. So, you know, I had purchased a pass, a 6-month hut pass, and so this was paid for basically. And I got this beautiful house on top of the mountains all to myself for the night. And so any good hiker or cyclist always prefers to make a loop, right? You don't want to do an out and back. You want to make a loop. And so I came up the way that we just sort of saw some pictures, and then I was headed back down to Reefton by a different trail. Now, Kiwis are sort of famous for their understatement of things. Either that or maybe Americans are really famous for their hyperbole and overstatement. But either way, we communicate a little differently. And so, for example, it could be pouring sideways rain and lightning all around you, and you run into some Kiwis on a hike, and they'll be like, it's all right, not bad. You know, it's just how they tend to operate. They just get about their business and don't make a big deal about it. And so I had met some people, mountain bikers and other people in town before planning this loop, who when I told them what I was planning, I sort of just got this pause and this look of like, that'll be a challenge. Now, no one ever said to me, Heather, this might be a really bad idea. No, they just like, let me go on my way and find out for myself. So I leave Kirwan's Hut and I head down the other side of the mountain to complete the loop back down to Reefton, where I'd actually left some of my gear to lighten my load. And well, the trail often looked like this. I think it took me something like 2 hours to cover 4 miles of downhill, and that was just part of the trail. There was a lot of lifting, dragging, pushing, shoving my bike involved in this leg of the trip, including one really big crash that actually scared myself pretty good. So if you are considering solo travel or curious of the risks of solo travel, I do carry a spot tracker with me. I don't run it all the time, but I keep it on my body so that I could hit an SOS button if needed in an emergency. But luckily, I recovered okay from what was a pretty rough crash and was able to go about my business more or less, but it definitely took some time to recover completely from that one. And eventually I did make it down the trail back to town. It was raining on me again. It'll do that. From Reefton, I carried on, ended up in this cool little place called Nelson Creek. And Nelson Creek is just sort of nowhere, a back road between 2 small towns. But so here I set up my camp, and literally across the street was the pub, the center of town, you know, all 5 houses of the village. And so I went over to the pub for a beer and dinner, and happened to meet one of the builders of the Kirwan hut that I had just been staying in 2 nights before. So that was just one of those neat moments of like, wow, I'm in a small place where everyone knows everyone, and you just meet a lot of people who understand what you're doing and where you've been. And in general, I just find in New Zealand, they're really supportive. As a solo female traveler in the US, I get a lot of comments that aren't very supportive. I can't go for a ride bikepacking solo in the US without someone being like, you're out here by yourself, and making a big deal out of it and asking me about safety. Whereas in New Zealand, they just say what they always say, which is good on you, and you get about your business, and no one thinks it's weird or dangerous for you to be out there doing it by yourself, which is one of the things that I love about traveling there. So after this, some weather came in again. Like I said, it was a theme this year. It was a wet, wet year. And this is called Brunner Lake. And once again, I sort of got forced into holing up in a room for about 3 days because it just was bad, bad weather, nonstop, heavy, heavy rain. But again, I lucked into a bunkhouse situation where really you're just paying for one bed, but I got the whole thing to myself for a very affordable price with this view of the lake. I would sneak in some little walks between rainstorms, and eventually it cleared. From Brunner Lake, yeah, this is just the morning it did clear a little. It's a very beautiful place. And then I was heading up toward Arthur Pass, and I was going up to Arthur's Pass to meet my boyfriend Jesse, because this is where the car part of the program came in. And so I'm going to, despite this being a cycle tour talk, show you a few pictures of just the beautiful places that we went by car, because you need to know they're out there and represent some of the beauty of New Zealand, even though I didn't ride my bike to them myself. And also, you can take the bus in New Zealand. On my first trip, I did that. I would put my bicycle under the bus, and it's only $10 extra, and use that to skip like some of the longer highway sections, because I prefer to be riding only on quiet roads or trails whenever possible. This is just one of the many lovely shots on the way up to Arthur's Pass. Arthur's Pass is the highest pass over what they call the Southern Alps in New Zealand, and there's 3 passes over the Alps, and Arthur's Pass is the highest. This is a bicycle ride up Arthur's Pass. There was sustained 16% grades on a paved road. It's not very often I meet a paved road that's difficult to pedal on my mountain bike gears, but this was one of those roads where it was tough to keep going. And like I said, in New Zealand, they'll just build it. If there's a problem, they'll figure out the engineering and build it. And so you can see the road goes under all that cement coverage, so that the mountainside could just go over the top of the road instead of constantly falling on the road and filling the road in. You can also see here how they got a river across the road, so that the road didn't get destroyed. And I just love the little sign up in the upper left-hand corner, Death's Corner ahead. It was steep and narrow, and it was a little sketchy. This was going up to Arthur's Pass from the West Coast, and honestly, I would never pedal it again. I was fortunate that traffic was low, and so I didn't have any close calls, but it's really, really narrow and steep and windy, and during high season, I would never recommend cycling it. But you can take the bus or the train up there to see the stuff near the summit of Arthur's Pass. One more shot of just, the little car showing just how steep that 16% grade is, and one of the lovely waterfalls, of which they have many in New Zealand. So now we're going by car. This were a few slides to show you a few of my favorite places. Glenorchy is just one of the most stunning places in New Zealand, in my opinion. And in Glenorchy, you can also walk one of the Great Walks, the Routeburn Great Walk. And it's also the location of Middle Earth for the Lord of the Ring fans out there. Trying to get this one to change. Yeah, so that's just one of the stunning views from the town of Glenorchy, and we did a hike back in there that was beautiful. And it wouldn't be a bad cycle. It's a little bit of a busy, winding road, but if you just go sort of, midday or super early morning to beat the traffic around 10 a.m. Everyone's always trying to get everywhere in New Zealand during high season. It wouldn't be too bad of a pill. Then we went down to the famous Fjordlands in southwest of the South Island. And oh man, it's just everything they say it is. So stunning. And this is Milford Sound. There's sort of two famous sounds to go to in the Fjordlands, Milford and Doubtful. Milford here is a little easier and therefore less expensive to get to. And I'm one of those people who do almost nothing touristy, like large groups of people and you pay money to be involved is not my thing usually. But that said, the boat ride in the Sound is really a must do. Also, it's very unusual that it's not raining there. We had this bluebird beautiful day, but it's almost always raining. But people say that in some ways it makes the Sound even more gorgeous and haunting and intense visually. So no matter what the weather, it's worth getting yourself down to Milford Sound. But again, it's this long, busy one-way road out and back that you might not want to cycle depending on your tolerance for cars and busyness. But there's lots of tour options and buses and other ways to get around in New Zealand. Don't tie yourself to being a purist and doing it in one way. Just get the places you want to go. Every now and then I like to prove that I was actually on these trips because, like I said, I'm usually the one behind the camera. So there's me enjoying a beautiful day at Milford Sound. But I will point out, being a beautiful day, peak summer, and I am wearing two wool layers, my warmest jacket, hat. Like, it's never warm down there, so dress accordingly. From Milford Sound, we then sort of cut across to start, and this is from the boat, so one picture in the Sound, and the boat takes you all the way out to the Tasman Sea and then turns around and comes back to the Sound. And I can't really show you scale on this imagery, but it's just these massive walls of green and waterfalls along each side of you the whole way on the boat ride. Really, really worthwhile. Now we're on the East Coast, so there's more cities, fishing towns. This particular town, why can't I say these? I can usually say these places. Oamaru. Oamaru claims it's the steampunk capital of the world, and they have a steampunk museum and amazing playgrounds that are all steampunk, and they have penguins, and it was just a really cool place to stop for someone who doesn't go into cities too much. I recommend Oamaru. So that was right about here. We're on the East Coast, working our way back up sort of towards Christchurch, just to show you where we're at. And so this is all currently by car, but there are cycle trails all throughout the southern half of the South Island. There are cycle options down here as well. So here, I'm sort of wrapping up my time on the South Island. I'm back in the northeast corner. I'm going to catch the ferry back over to the North Island. And I was camped in this little bay called the Robin Hood camping area and bay. And it was a free campground, just a long drop, they call it, a pit toilet, and nothing else. But so what you're seeing here is an abalone. And how that came to be, I did not go fishing for it in the bay. But when you're a cycle tourist, especially when you're alone, people talk to you and people want to help you and people are really nice to you. And so there was in a nearby camper van, this Swiss couple, and someone had just given them what they just kept calling a slug. You know, their English was, better than my German. And they said, they came over to my tent to invite me over for dinner because some fishermen had given them this slug that's supposed to be really expensive and wonderful, and I hadn't seen it yet. So I'm like, I don't know what they're talking about, and I don't even usually eat much seafood, but I'm gonna go hang out and maybe have some and check it out. So I go over there, and I'm like, oh, it's an abalone, okay. And so they managed with a screwdriver and a hammer to get it out of the shell and cook it up with some garlic and shared a beautiful meal with me. They taught me things about the politics in their country and how things work. And it was just a great opportunity to connect with other people and learn about different cultures. This is in that campground. It had been raining again, hence the rain jacket, but the nice kind of rain where it just sort of comes and goes and you might get a rainbow. There's the long drop in the background. And from there, okay, so that was all sort of right up in here. And then I take the ferry back across to Wellington. The entire length of both the North and South Island, there's a trail called the Tour Aotearoa. Aotearoa is the Maori term for New Zealand. And so it's a cycle tour that follows roads and paths and trails the entire length of both islands. And well, on the southern island, I didn't follow it because I wanted to explore more as a sightseer and or more specific mountain bike trails. On the North Island, I didn't have much more of a plan other than to mostly follow this Tour of Aotearoa trail. So we're headed up on the North Island, and this is just one of those campgrounds on a bike trail, the Pakaratahi Trail on the North Island. Again, had all this to myself. There were bathrooms nearby and everything, and you're set up for the night. This is pretty fun. This is in Ekatawoa, and Ekatawoa has this giant kiwi sculpture and also a great little campground, and was right on route. Just a nice little place to spend the night. So in New Zealand, they have a lot of these things that they call paper roads. And paper roads are roads that exist on the maps, on paper, but they weren't necessarily ever built. So someone, you know, had a plan for this town and this road that connects this town or this community, and they put it on the map, and then the road never came into existence. Or what happened often is the road did exist, it was a public roadway, but then it just sort of got taken over by local farmlands, and they started marking it off as private and putting up gates. That would never happen in the US, right? But anyway, so then you couldn't pass on this road without fearing that you were trespassing because you don't live there, so you're not sure what's right, what's wrong. I try not to break too many laws in other countries. And so these paper roads are a problem when you're using Google Maps to navigate, because Google Maps doesn't seem to know the difference between a paper road and a real road, or a road that's been blocked off as private. So you definitely would have some frustrating times when you're riding along and you think you're going to go through a certain direction and it's gated and marked private, or there's just no road there. So then you just start talking to people and trying to find your way around. But you definitely got to watch out a little bit for those paper roads in New Zealand. I like to always just sit with this image for a moment. This, I don't know, this is one of my favorites. This is the Wanganui River Valley. And the Wanganui River Valley is, it has personhood. It's been granted official legal personhood. It's one of 3 rivers in the world, the other 2 being in India, where this is true. And so what that means is that you have to respect the indigenous rights a lot more of the Maori people. It's a lot harder to make any changes or developments in or near the river, because this is ancestrally the Maori people considered the river to be very sacred, especially the headwaters of the river, which had actually been diverted for some time from this Wanganui River. And so in, I think it was around 2017 or so, not so long ago, they successfully got personhood for this river. And so it really has to be treated with more respect, and you have to get through a lot more laws and care before you can make any changes. And it's just stunningly beautiful. And I stayed a really unique place along this river, called the Flying Fox. And so to stay at the Flying Fox, you had to take this hand-pulled sort of gondola across the river, and you had to hit the gong to let them know you were there. So you ride up on your bicycle and you park it and you get your bags, or if you ride by car, because this was on a road, you could ride by car, and you go over and you hit the gong so that on the other side of the river, the owners of the Flying Fox know you're there and can hand pull you across the river in this cart to stay at their grounds. And as I said, if the weather's good, I'm always camping. But they also had nice indoor accommodations and houses, and everything here was built from recycled materials. And you see a lot of that in New Zealand, a lot more using recycled materials, a lot more creativity, small houses in general. You know, they use cargo containers a lot as sort of a base for a home even. Just a lot of colorful creativity, and not everything doesn't need to be bigger to be better there. People are happy with smaller spaces. There's a lovely outdoor shower here at the Flying Fox, outdoor kitchen, eating area. Before I go on here, I'll just take one of the questions that I noticed popping up. Someone asked if the open street maps are any better than Google Maps for these paper roads. And, you know, I don't know. I'm not one to play with different map types and technology much. I just don't like playing with technology. I'd rather just use the couple things I know and then talk to people as necessary to self-correct. So I couldn't tell you a good answer to that question. And they're not like a big problem. It's not like you have to go to New Zealand and be worried like, oh no, I'm gonna get stuck by a paper road. But they are out there, and I just think they're really fun and funny to think about. So I wouldn't worry about it too much. From the Flying Fox, I continued up the Wanganui River Valley onto an official cycle path called the Mountain to Ocean Trail. But of course, I'm going north, so I'm going ocean to mountains. So I'm doing the whole trail sort of backwards, which is what everyone kept telling me. You're doing it the hard way, you're doing it backwards. I'm like, yeah, but I'm trying to get north. And this bridge is called the Bridge to Nowhere because it's literally just trail on each side of this bridge in the middle of nowhere. They built the bridge originally trying to get more growth and activity out in this area, and then it never happened. And so now there's this big, beautiful, sturdy, car-worthy bridge in the middle of nowhere. And so a reminder that we are on the North Island now. And I will say this, if you're going to go to New Zealand and you're just going to choose an island, go to the South Island. 100% go to the South Island. It's just more spectacular scenery. It's less people, less big cities. If you're going for outdoor to see beautiful places, go to the South Island. Not that they don't have gorgeous places on the North Island, but they're a little bit more isolated and you have to go to them. Whereas in the South Island, it's just like everything around you is nonstop amazing. And so related to that, I don't really recommend doing the South Island and then going to the North Island because, well, the North Island, just between you and me, is a little bit of a letdown after the South Island. So if you're going to do both, I would say do the North Island. You'll be amazed by all the beautiful things you're seeing. And then you'll get to the South Island and you'll be even more amazed. They had a lot of these swinging bridges that you had to push your bike through. And at this point in the trip, I was actually using my small panniers on my bike. You may have noticed early on, I was using a Bikepacking saddlebag because I wanted a lighter bike for the more rigorous trails early in my trip. Whereas later in the trip, I was more on roads and easier trails, and it's convenient to carry stuff to have the panniers. But these swinging bridges were really tight, and I would have to squeeze through, and I was careless once, and some of the wire ripped open my pannier, and you can see where I had to sew it, and then I covered that with tape. And so, you know, when you travel for an extended period of time, you want to carry pretty extensive repair kits with you. I'm not going to talk much about gear today, but you definitely want to be pretty prepared. So now I'm finally getting to the mountain part of the Mountains to Ocean Trail. And this mountain is the Ngauruhoe mountain. I'm probably saying that one wrong. we mispronounce, Americans mispronounce everything in New Zealand. Just live with it. It's how it is. Also known as Mount Doom, though, in the Lord of the Rings. And this is actually the headwaters of that Wanganui River that we were just looking at. And near here is a place called National Park, which may sound like a national park, but it's actually a city. And from National Park, there's this really well-known hike, super touristy for sure, but I heard it was a gorgeous hike, and there's shuttles that run from town to do it. And so I thought, all right, been riding a lot of days, and I really wanted to mix up some hiking. And so I'll grab one of these shuttles and head up to the Tongariro Alpine Crossing at 28 kilometers, which is about as many kilometers as this cyclist wants to walk in a day usually. And it was just through gorgeous alpine country with lakes. But you're gonna be with like hundreds of your best friends, so just know it's busy, but it is definitely beautiful. From there, I went on the timber trail. And for those of you that have maybe heard a bunch of my talks in the past, I was the first person to ride an unsupported length of the Oregon Timber Trail when it was first created a few years ago. Well, they also have a timber trail on the North Island of New Zealand. And one of my great disappointments of taking photos with my phone is that I cannot capture the greenness of New Zealand. A lot of it is rainforests. And so these trees and the moss are just these vibrant greens, of which all I can tell you is my pictures do very little justice. I ran into some folks on this bridge who offered to take a photo for me. I was drying out. I was getting rained on yet again. That was the theme this year. But no, the 2 years before when I was in New Zealand, I had almost no rain. So it doesn't have to be wet all the time, but it can be. One of the drinks you'll see a lot in New Zealand is called L&P. And the L&P stands for lemon and peora. And most people then are like, well, what's peora, right? Is it a spice, a flavor, a tree, a herb? What is it? It's the name of the town where L&P is made. And it turns out that the Torre Peora route takes you through Peora. So I just couldn't resist this meta picture of me holding a can of L&P in front of the L&P sign or statue. And here you can see my setup a little bit, where now I've switched to carrying panniers in the back. And in the blue bag on the back is my backpack. I really don't like riding all day, every day with a backpack on. I'd rather have it on the bike, and then I can pull it out when I need to get a bunch of groceries in a town, or when I want to go for a backpacking night or two. This is just a really cool tree on the North Island. They're called kauri trees. Kauri trees. There we go. They are very large. They're the largest tree by volume. Their diameter is similar to our sequoias, and they're being killed by something called a kauri wasting disease. And so before you hike in any area with these trees, they have these little stations, these cleansing decontamination stations that you have to get on with your shoes and your hiking shoes and put disinfectant on your feet and sort of scrape it off before you're allowed to go hike in this area, so that you don't transfer this wasting disease from one area to another. I love cool signs when I travel, and New Zealand does so many just like, to me, quirky signs. The one that says, warning, all preschool children are required to be supervised by an adult when using this facility, may not seem that strange until you keep seeing it over and over again in the long drops. I really wonder, did someone lose a child down the long drop, and that's why these signs had to go up everywhere? Like, inquiring minds want to know. I love the buggies and quads, off-roading, and quilt shop. Like, just a great combination, you know? And then the ever ubiquitous bathroom signs in New Zealand. Because they get so many international tourists from all over the world there, not every culture has the same bathroom habits, and so not everyone knows how to appropriately use New Zealand toilets, which are like American bathrooms. And so you see all kinds of signs in the bathrooms, anywhere from passive-aggressive to humorous. This particular sign is telling you not to flush your hopes and dreams. Yeah, I'm on board with that. people make the trip. So I have friends in Auckland, and the reason I have friends in Auckland is because 2 years ago when I was cycle touring in New Zealand, I met other cycle tourists, and some of them were from Auckland. And so these cool dudes set me up with housing in Auckland and even helped me out some earlier in the island with a little bit of transportation and fuel needs, and just took good care of me. And if you feel like the world is not a very nice place, go cycle touring, and you'll suddenly believe that there are a lot of good people out there again. And so shout out to the folks who, put a roof over my head and helped me get bike boxes and get to the airport. Because at this point, I'm going to be leaving New Zealand and heading to Australia. Most of my time in Australia was spent in Tasmania and a little bit on the mainland. And this particular image was from Western Australia on the mainland. But just to show you where we are a little bit, over here on the right is New Zealand, and then I flew to Hobart, Tasmania, and I'm going to show you most of the pictures from Tasmania, and then I took a ferry across from Tasmania to Melbourne, where our great friend picked me up and took me to our house down here on the beach and up to some beautiful forests in Victoria. Then I flew, because Australia is really, really big, over to Perth, where I have some friends who had recently moved back from the US, and we did a road trip up the West Coast, and then I flew back to Melbourne and eventually home. So we're going to be mostly down here in the beautiful island of Tasmania. So as I mentioned, I flew into Hobart and then started cycling this way over Mount Wellington and then down south, and then worked my way up north. This was about 3 weeks of cycling, what's shown here in Tasmania. And as you can see, there's still so much of it I didn't see. That first day, I left Wellington, pushed my bike for hours, endless hours up this really steep fire break road, and I thought, oh boy, this is going to be tough. And all day it was steep, it was loose, there was not a patch of flat ground anywhere, there was no water anywhere. It was getting to be evening, and I had been riding all day, and I was like, something's got to show up, something's got to show up. And then this nirvana, like this beautiful hidden place away from the dirt road. It wasn't like only 4x4 trucks. I saw one vehicle all day would go on it. There was water nearby, and it was flat and private, and just this gorgeous spot to set up for my first Tasmanian night. What I didn't know is that the top of Mount Wellington is one of the coldest places in Tasmania. At this point, it's February. It's February 14th. I flew over to Tasmania, and so that's getting to be sort of late season. In general, they have a really funny idea of summer in Tasmania. Think summer and then put on a few layers, and you're ready for a Tasmanian summer. But as I was setting up camp, as soon as the shadows got long, I could just feel that air temperature dropping in that hard alpine kind of way that is like, warning, warning, it's going to be really cold tonight. So I put on all my clothes, all my rain gear, bags on my feet, and everything on, and got curled up in bed. And when I woke up in the morning, indeed, water bottles were frozen, everything's covered in frost. I was like, all right, welcome to Tasmania. This is going to be a little more challenging than New Zealand was. Tasmania is, for me, all about the animals that you just won't see anywhere else in the world. Here's one of the awesome animals, an echidna. You'll never get tired of seeing an echidna. They are adorable and not particularly shy, so you can get some decent photos of them. I cycled south to a place down a long road called Cockle Creek to Southwest National Park, where there was free camping right next to the water. And I stayed 2 nights here and was able to go for a hike to this beautiful location. And at this point, you get welcomed with a cool sign that says, "You are standing at the southernmost point of Australia." So that was pretty neat to be in the most southern spot of the whole country. It is beautiful. So I mentioned the animals, the scenery is beautiful in Tasmania, but there's so many unique animals that, as an American, blow your mind. I did see some Tasmanian devils in captivity, sort of a retirement home. Tasmanian devils are endangered because there's a contagious cancer, a mouth or cheek cancer that's contagious, plus loss of habitat and things like that. So when they can no longer breed them or reintroduce them, some of them end up at these sort of retirement homes, if you will, where I got to see them. And this echidna, I couldn't resist showing you another echidna because it's using its little snout there to get ants. It was just eating up ants like nobody's business, and a happy little echidna there. So that was cool. They also have very big trees in Tasmania. This is Eucalyptus regnans, which nearly rivals our coastal redwoods in California. This is the third tallest kind of tree in the world. And this particular one, but the tallest one in Tasmania is 100 meters or 330 feet tall. I had happened to read a book about redwoods last year, and they talked about these eucalyptus trees, these massive eucalyptus trees in Australia. And that's where I learned that they also have things like dry leeches, tree leeches, like leeches that aren't just in water in Tasmania. The whole animal thing is interesting after coming from New Zealand, where nothing can kill you. If you hike in the mud in the rain in New Zealand, you can literally like have leeches fall out of trees onto your body. Yeah, that's what it is. So fortunately, I met my goal. I escaped the entire trip without getting a single leech, which was my primary Tasmania goal. Here I'm camping in a place called Mount Field National Park. And the river behind me is notable because this is where I started my platypus watch. This was the first place that I learned that they in fact have platypi, I suppose, in Tasmania. And they had been seen in this river next to the campground. So every morning and evening I would sit and watch and watch. And I didn't see one here, but I did eventually see a platypus in another river, which was really cool sighting. And I also had some neighbors who had an ute. An ute is a pickup truck in Australia or New Zealand, and the cool hikes that I wanted to do were up on top of the mountain, and I really didn't want to do a 16-mile climb followed by a 5 or 6 hour hike. So I asked my neighbors if they could give me and my bike a ride up the mountain so I could hike and then just coast back down to camp at the end of the day, which they kindly did. And so I got up to these alpine lakes. Again, this is Mount Field National Park. Just a panorama from up high on the hike that I did there. Warning, next slide has some animals. If you are deathly afraid of snakes, close your eyes. These are horrible quality photos, but they're animals and they're cool. So on the left is something called a pademelon, and on the right is a wallaby. And so it's sort of like a scale up to kangaroo. So they're all, get the right word, they're all macropods, but the pademelon is the smallest, and then in the middle is the wallaby, and then bigger is a kangaroo. And the pademelons and wallabies are everywhere in New Zealand. You're gonna see them. They're awesome and cute and not very bright. I think they would like constantly trip over my tent guy lines and stuff. Now, snakes. I mentioned in New Zealand no snakes. Well, in Tasmania, there's only 3 kinds of snakes, so that's good news. The bad news is all 3 types are venomous. So it made for a little bit of nerve-wracking hiking. And in fact, I did see one of these tiger snakes nice and close up on one of my hikes. But yeah, you just keep your eyes open. They weren't like everywhere waiting to kill you all the time. Here I was in the Central Highlands, and this is on something called the Tasmanian Trail that crosses the north-south length of Tasmania that I follow sometimes. And just a beautiful sunset, a great place to camp. Weather was coming though, and the next day was one more day of good riding, and then I set up at this sort of fishing camp, and the whole night it sleeted and snowed and rained, and I was able to hitchhike down into the town of Deloraine, where I have some friends that I met a few years ago cycle touring in Canada, and stay a night with them and sort of dry out and have some good food. And yeah, From there, headed into Jerusalem National Park. Beautiful place to hike and spend the night. That's actually where that picture of the tiger snake was taken. I will say that one of the things that's stuck with me about Jerusalem National Park and the naming of all the formations and on my map was they didn't give any mention to the indigenous peoples, the Aboriginal names of the area and the formations, which of course had to have names and exist. Whereas I feel like in New Zealand, they do a really good job of reintroducing Maori indigenous names and sharing those names, making them known and utilized. And I felt like in Tasmania, that history was still really of genocide was really still being ignored. And I would have liked to have seen more open acknowledgement of the truth of their history and trying to bring back some of those original names of places. This is another national park. I sort of did a tour of national parks in Tasmania to a certain extent. This is Cradle Mountain, where again, it was snowing and sleeting on me. Yeah, late February, early March in Tasmania is an interesting version of summer. Yeah, it was cold and wet a lot, but beautiful, really beautiful. I then took the ferry from Devonport over to Melbourne, mainland Australia. First time I ever slept on a boat, so that was cool. I love ferries and bikes. It's just a great combination because you just roll your bike on. It's so much easier than flying with a bike. In Melbourne, wait for the photo to come up. Come on. In Melbourne, my awesome friend Michelle, pictured here, picked me up. We met years ago cycle touring in Canada, and she took me around to a few places by car, let me stay at her house, and again, just that hospitality and community of the bikepacking and cycle touring world is really beautiful connections you make. And then from here, I flew over to Perth, and I just want to show you a couple of pictures, and I'm wrapping up. I know this is a long time to sit, of Western Australia. So again, this is cheating, this was by car, but this is Pinnacles area in Western Australia where my friends Brett and Natalie took me. And going up the coast, we went up to Kalbarri National Park. Here's on the coast. And then we I did a little bit of some small hikes in Kalbarri National Park. And you sort of got, they called it the edge of the outback, you know, just to give me a little taste of the heat, the flies, oh, the flies, so many flies, and the red and the dust and the dirt in that part of Australia that's so different than anything you would see in Tasmania. We got to swim in the Indian Ocean, which was really cool. And so at this point, it's March 12th. Anybody know what was happening in around mid-March in the world? Yeah, it was getting pretty crazy, right? It was clear that the coronavirus, COVID-19, was becoming very serious, and I needed to get my butt home. Borders were closing fast. I had friends trapped in Peru who were trekking because they slammed their borders shut with no warning. No one ever knows what's going to happen in the US these days, and so I was worried about even being able to get into the States if I waited too long. And I didn't want to have to quarantine and isolate and rent an apartment in Australia and be stuck there, as much as it'd be cool to see more of Australia when all my, community is here in the US right now, most of it. So I moved my flight up and got my butt and my bike back to Santa Barbara before I was worried that maybe I wouldn't be able to, and then did 2 weeks of hard isolation after the flight, and then have been staying fairly isolated since. So first, thank you for looking at all these pictures of these far-flung places that none of us can go right now, but we will again someday, hopefully. But I want to always remind everyone that you can do bikepacking and cycle touring locally, wherever you are. This was before that trip, but with friends, Jesse on his, what we call his jalopy cruiser, and Ann and Conrad on their tandem, and we just went down to El Capitan and camped for a night. So it may not be the far off, places, but you can get out and sleep outside and use your gear and hang out, safely, socially distanced with your friends right here on the coast. As soon as it cools back down a little bit, you can go into the back country here. This is at 19 Oaks Camp, which is a measly 4 miles in from out on Paradise Road. So you can walk in or bike in or whatever way you want to get there and sleep outside in the beauty of our own back country. At this point, I want to highlight, if you're going to go out there and do these things, it's really important to know about leave no trace principles. The most important being, if there's not a toilet, make sure you bury your poo and pack out your toilet paper and, you know, keep things clean and nice and leave things better than you found them. If you're looking for local Santa Barbara resources, I recommend a couple of these websites. You might want to screenshot or grab a picture of it if you're interested. Hike Los Padres is a local site that tells you where water users update water availability in our backcountry, because water availability is the biggest barrier to over backcountry travel here in Santa Barbara. Tour de los Padres, the Weebly site, my friend Erin made that and started the first bikepacking race, non-race in Santa Barbara, but it has tons of great resources for just trails, GPX files for places to go ride your bike around here. And let's see, bikepackingroutes.org is a nonprofit that helps develop bikepacking routes. Another great place to get routes, and also gear review, lots and lots of gear review, is bikepacking.com. So those are some useful resources if you want to get out there. Also, before I forget, I want to mention that Christine put up the link for her Columbia talk in September in the chat room, and Lori put up her link for Traffic Solutions Cycle September in the chat room. And don't worry, I haven't forgot about your chance to win things. So here's what we're going to do. If you want to win a timber bell, which are these great little bells for your bike with on-off switches on the trails so you don't scare the hikers, you can do that. They're donated by Sage, our local trail group, and you have to email me your answers to these 3 questions within 24 hours, and you have to live between Ventura and Goleta, because I have to be able to bicycle deliver your bell. I'm not mailing them, sorry, especially not to Australia. And yeah, or if you want to come get one, then you can enter, but you got to be able to be in my bike zone. And so both SB Bike and Sage Trail Alliance have new executive directors in the last year or so. So I think it's important for you to know who those people are. And so if you don't already know their names, you can Google away and to go check out the websites. And so I need you within 24 hours to email me the name of the ED of SB Bike, the name of the ED of Sage Trail Alliance. And the final question is to honor this historical Chumash lands that we're all using and sharing right now. So the question is, what SB County Trail is popular with mountain bikers and has a Chumash name? And if you can come up with the English translation for that name. And if you get 2 out of the 3 correct and get those to me within 24 hours, I'll do a drawing from there and let you know via email that you won. All other emails will not be answered, sorry, and thanks for playing. Yeah, and any questions for those about that, pop them in the chat. And again, thanks to SB Bike for organizing, Sage for donating the bells, Drotsman Ale Works for helping us get beer. If you want to follow my personal adventures at all, I put up my website there, my personal blog. Right now, it's mostly about baking, cooking, and social justice issues, because I'm not doing a whole lot of traveling, but you know, there's stuff there, and hopefully someday I'll do some more. And thanks for listening and coming out today. I really appreciate it, and it's really weird talking to my computer, so I hope I wasn't too boring. I usually like throw out M&Ms and things to make it more exciting. Let me know if you have any questions or anything, and we can do that before we shut down for the night.
Thank you, Heather. This is great.
Thanks, Dave. I can't wait to see your slideshow next month, you and Christine.
All right.
Goodbye. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I think everybody
Unmuted.
a beer.
Yeah, all right. I'm thinking no questions, last chance, we're out of here.
Well, thanks, Heather. I recorded your presentation, so I will share it. I think some people left early or whatever, but I'll share it. And if I forget your name, please reach out to me if you want to see it. Thanks so much,
That's awesome.
Heather. It was great.
Thank you, Christine. Thanks, everybody.